Hello and welcome to this prismatic machining video. This is part of a sequence that you've been following. We are now looking at the second setup, and if you've been following along, you would have inserted already a facing operation and a profiling operation. So the next step is to start moving into these regions here where the pockets are. So if you recall, when we looked at how do we strategize in terms of machining this second setup, if you recall, we identified a number of pockets, and the first one on this side is what's shown in green here. So this is a closed pocket, meaning that there is no open side, and we also have the bottom of this pocket is the top of this island or protrusion, which is below the top surface here. So we're going to start off by machining this closed pocket, setting up the operation for doing that. So let's go back to our PPR3. So our pocketing operation is just above the facing operation on the operations toolbar. And I'm going to insert this after the profiling operation. And here is our pocketing definition window. So again, the image tells you what needs to be selected, the geometry of the pocket. So one thing to notice first off is the type of pocket. Right now this is showing an open pocket. And because we're doing a closed pocket, we have to toggle the pocket type from open to close. So clicking on this link here will do that for you, this hyperlinked text. And again, we see the image here that we can work with, we need to turn pretty much everything in here green. So I'm going to hide the stock because again, remember we face down to this surface, so this is now the top of our part. So again, just like with other operations, we're going to go through and select the geometry to define the pocket. So clicking on this and then clicking here defines the top surface. And then the bottom is going to be the top of the island. So let's click on this. And as before, notice that CATIA automatically picks the boundaries of that surface to define the guide or the limiting walls of the pocket. And it also, because there was also an inner boundary, it selected that as an island. Now, neither of those are correct selections. So what we're going to do is right-click, remove all contours, and we're also going to right-click, remove all islands. For this top pocket, there aren't any islands, so we don't even have to worry about this. Okay, to go ahead and select the walls, so if you recall, you've been using the technique where you select and then you pick the edges. I'm going to show you another way in which you can select your guiding elements, and that's by using faces. In order to do this, instead of left-clicking, we right-click, and then we go to by belt of faces. And if you look closely, you'll see that there is a toolbar that appears, which is called your face selection toolbar, which is similar to your edge selection toolbar. So instead of selecting edges, we're going to select faces to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and start by picking this face. And I'm going to show you right away some other options that help you speed up selection, because if you look at this, there are several faces there that need to be picked here because there are these three faces at each corner. So what I'm going to do is select the next face. So let's say we're going to pick these faces as a belt going in this direction counterclockwise. I'm going to pick this face. Now there are a few other tools that now appeared on the toolbar. The second tool here is similar to a tool that I showed you previously on the edge selection toolbar. This is called Navigate on Faces until a face. So we've now established the direction around which we're going to do the pick. I'm going to select this tool, and I'm going to basically tell CATIA, I want you to navigate as best as you can all the way around until you come back to this face over here. And let's see if it does everything. We may have to do it twice if it doesn't, but let's see how far we get. And there we go. It actually did navigate and pick all these other faces all the way around until it got back to that face that I picked. So again, this is a really useful tool in helping speed up. There are other tools here that you can use too for different things. So So now we're picking faces as opposed to edges. Again, when you're done, you hit OK or double click in the background. And now we have the faces for our guiding elements or our drive elements selected. And we're done here. As far as the cutting tool goes, the cutting tool by default is the one that was used for the previous operation, which is the profiling operation. And we're going to use the same tool. If you were to measure these fillet radii in here, they would measure 3/4 of an inch. So a half inch cutter is going to be more than adequate to get in there. So we're going to stick with that tool, not change it. Let's go to the fourth tab. Notice that it's part of the same tool change too. So obviously you're not going to do a tool change between these operations. The tool will just transition from the profiling directly to the pocketing operation. Let's look at the speeds and feeds, and these are the same speeds and feeds that were used previously. Same approach and retract rate, and we're going to stick with these. So these are the same ones that were used for the profiling operation. We don't need to change them. Let's go to our macros tab, or our approaches. So these again have to be set, and if we look at what needs to be set here, we have an initial approach and initial retract. I'm going to go ahead and just work with those for now. We're going to come back and look at setting the approaches for the various other parts of a pocketing operation after we've seen what the toolpaths look like. So to start off with, what I'm going to do for the approach is I'm just going to use the top of the part, and then I'm going to offset it upwards. Let's offset it upwards 100 thousandths. And then for the retract, I'm going to offset it upwards. So I'm using a little bit more than I have in the past. I used 50 thousandths before, so again, it's a little bit longer of an approach, but it's a little bit better visualizing it when it's longer. So again, we're going to have to come back and do more here, obviously, but let's go ahead and see what we're going to do as far as our pocketing strategy is first, before we actually set up our approaches and retracts. So let's jump to the first tab. And our toolpath style. So there are various toolpath styles. There are actually a lot of these for pocketing. And again, the picture tells you what each one of these means. So outward helical, where the tool starts in the center and works its way outwards. Inward helical, where the tool starts closest to the pocket wall and works its way inwards. There's back and forth. Back one way. So in other words, you're keeping the direction of cut the same. Offset on path, zigzag, concentric, outward spiral, which looks very similar to concentric, inward spiral morphing, and so on. So these are more complicated toolpaths that are often used for high-speed machining. We're going to work with the first one, which is the outward helical, meaning the tool comes down in the center of the pocket and then works its way towards the wall. And we're going to stick with climb cutting. So that's our first tab. Our second tab is our radial step over. So again, this tells us how much do we want the tool to step over as it moves from one pass to the next. Right now it's set to 10% of tool diameter. So it means that the distance between passes is 0.45. I'm going to up this a little bit to 25%. So the distance between two paths centers is going to be 3/8 of an inch, as we can see here. And again, these other options aren't relevant here for this particular operation. Let's go to axial. So we're going to step downwards, and we're going to use 50 thousandths as our depth of cut. So maximum depth of cut 50 thousandths. And this tells us that 11 levels are needed to go from the top to the bottom. Now again, you may find that for a particular assignment, the instructor gives you different numbers. Again, you know, some of these numbers will change, so don't take these as being the only numbers they can be for your depth of cut, also for your radial step over. You need to follow the instructions as is given to you for a particular assignment, or if you're doing a project, if you're working with an advisor, whatever values they give you. And then finally, for finishing, we want to, let's say in this case we're not going to do any finishing. We could finish. So if we wanted to, we have the option here to finish on the side at each level, last level, each level, finish the bottom, and finish the bottom and side at the last level. Now notice that most of the bottom of this pocket is not there because this is the only surface here. This annular surface is the only surface that will be left after we remove the material below. So there's a question as whether it would even be efficient at all to try and finish this bottom, you know, given that this is what you want. So that's a question to be considered. The other thing to be considered is, do you want to finish this wall here as part of the top pocket, or do you want to wait until you get down to the bottom and finish this entire wall with a single pass? And the question, some of the things you may need to consider before you can decide this is how long of a stick out on the cutter do you want, because that could influence things like deflection and chatter, and how long your cutting edge actually is. So these are things to think about. Thinking about it, I will add a side finish on the last level, just so that we finish this top pocket before we jump down to the bottom pocket. And we're going to leave 10 thousandths to finish. But we're not going to use a finishing pass on the bottom. That's why it's grayed out here. So let's go ahead and generate our toolpaths. And there we go. We see that we have toolpaths on each level, and then the light blue shows you what the finishing pass is. And again, if you look at some of these options here, if we go to the last option here, which is sectioning of toolpaths, we can look at each level by clicking on the little yellow plane to see what the toolpaths are that are being machined on each level. And then the very last level shows you both the roughing pass, and then because we're only finishing on the wall, you're not going to see any blue paths across the bottom because we're just doing a finishing, almost like a profiling pass along the wall to remove that final 10 thousandths. What's missing here is, let's go back to continuous replay. There are some motions that are repositioning the tool so that it can move between levels, but as you recall, we haven't really set any of our approaches or retracts other than the initial approach and the final retract. So that's something that we have to pay attention to. That's the 5th tab, and we're going to come back to that in a second, actually in the next video. Let's just go to our material removal, so our full video, and let's just replay this just so that we can see where we are in terms of, and this is going to replay everything, so we can speed it up by moving the slider through and then drop it back before we get to the pocketing operation. So you can see one of the consequences of not properly setting our approaches. The tool actually, after completing the profiling operation, just went right through the part to get to the start of the pocketing operation. So that's something that we're going to have to fix. But we can see here what the actual pocketing operation is and what that's doing here. So you can see problems that the material removal simulation picks up. And this was predictable because we did not set any of the other options for approach and retract. So these are the basic steps in setting up the pocketing operation. In the next video, we're going to look at how to correctly set those approaches and retracts to actually eliminate that problem that we saw, that tool running through the part.